with Purple Mountain Pods. And today we're actually having a special feature, and we have Schylar Knox here with us. She's an undergrad in sociology, and she's recently discovered some things that have really made her think. And we decided to have a conversation about it today. And that conversation is going to be about racism after death. That's something we don't really think about and something we don't really consider taking with us after we leave this world. But actually, there's quite a bit of evidence to state that this may be the case. So today we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about what the real world repercussions of that might be and a very real world example of that. So Schylar, why don't you tell me your story?
Hey.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. First, my little disclaimer is that I am a white woman. And
as am I.
Yes, right. But I have different sorts of resources and privilege that I'm taking, and I'm going to do the best things that I can with it.
I think that that's our responsibility.
And
right?
that really never really hit me before until you're facing with like a huge reality.
Sure.
So I guess we'll just start from the beginning.
Yeah.
I have a friend who really enjoys paying tribute and laying flowers in local cemeteries, and she's interested in ones that are usually like small family areas or smaller plots, but she came across this cemetery and it blew her mind, and she called me, and she's having a whole moment because she is just blown away by what she just saw.
And where is this cemetery?
This is actually the cemetery is called Eastport African American Cemetery, but it's also known as the Good Citizens Cemetery, which makes this story all that much more important to tell. So my girlfriend, she comes and she's telling me about everything she's seeing, and I really wanted to see it. And I had some flowers at the house, and I told her, I was like, well, let's go over there and put them on there. And when you picture like a forgotten or an abandoned graveyard, you kind of get that image of, trees and a little bit of overgrown grass and what you would imagine or see in a movie.
Right. Just a little spook factor.
Yeah. No. This was the most shocking thing I've seen.
Right.
And it's in our own backyard.
Yeah.
So,
and this is in Knoxville,
Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I was just blown away. So we go there, and it's not just overgrown. I would advise for nobody to try to go in further than what you can see.
Right.
Of course I pushed it.
Yeah.
But I had someone with me. I had I wasn't alone. I was very aware it was daylight, and I had to know.
Yeah.
But
So
as a disclaimer.
What did you find?
Well, so when we first go in, on the fence line, you see a couple of headstones.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little plot up on the top, like on the corner, that is the only piece of land that's actually been maintained from a small family, and I'll tell you more about that. But we go in, and you're moving branches, and you start seeing like poking up of headstones,
Yeah.
and knocked over things. But not just that, but you can't see the majority of them. There is thousands of people buried here, and I could find maybe 30 tombstones.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's crazy.
And it is just like overgrown with kudzu and sinkholes. And sinkholes, yes. Grave slip, coffin collapse.
Oh,
I don't know if, imagine like just this massive mound shaped like a coffin.
Oh,
with
spooky.
Yes.
Ooh.
And these sinkholes have been just so sudden and just dropped that the roots of the trees are coming out the side.
Wow.
And it's been neglected for so long that trees are literally wrapping around headstones.
Wow.
And
so safe to say, pretty dangerous.
Oh, incredibly dangerous.
Oh, wow.
Like, and anybody who's from Tennessee knows we have snakes and we have ticks.
Lots of them.
Yes. Snakes and ticks, but it's just, you can't see. You can't see where you're walking. Like, the kudzu's everywhere. There's ivy. And, that to me was just, it was shocking.
Yeah.
But not just that, was the location and the condition it's in.
Right.
The road and a plot is owned by the county. So people usually use this area as their local dump. Lots of trash, lots of broken furniture, things that would be too busy to like haul off. Yeah. So they just toss it there.
In a graveyard.
They don't even know it's a graveyard.
Oh, is there no sign or anything?
There is a very, very small sign against the first chain lock, the fence.
Yeah.
But the only graves that are visible is just there on that corner.
I see.
You would not know that there's graves in there.
Wow.
And that was just so, like, for me, I didn't know how many people were buried there.
Right.
Until after I left, and I'm like, oh my God, like, what do I do?
Right.
Like, what,
yeah.
It's just your mind goes every which way. And this, like, how, the condition.
Yeah.
The condition. And then it just opens up into this huge issue that Knoxville has no idea exists.
Even though they own it.
Yes.
Crazy.
But then, they don't know who owns part of it.
I see. So does that mean that they don't take responsibility for the part they do own?
Exactly, because Tennessee has no laws regarding upkeeping of burial grounds.
Really?
Yes, which is a big issue too.
Yeah.
Because considering that this is one of the oldest Black cemeteries in Knoxville, it also was the property where the first Black church was built that was believed to be a stop on the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
And nobody knows it.
So this should be like a historical...
Oh, absolutely.
Like a protected, preserved site.
Right. And with a name like Good Citizens Cemetery, the people that are buried there were good people.
Right. And they should be remembered. But also, isn't there like a certain amount of responsibility that should be taken by the owner of the cemetery, which at least part of it is owned by Knox County? And then you bring in the part of it that it's a dangerous space that's technically public land, right?
The land wouldn't be considered public. I think that they have to have to be in charge of that to remove garbage and things like that.
I see.
I feel, but there is other pieces that have been owned by private land, but these people are probably not even alive.
Right.
Because this cemetery hasn't even been, no one has been buried there since the 50s.
Right, and it was started in 1836, I think
yes.
you said?
Yes.
Wow.
And
it seems like the Historical Society should come in and like in some way take responsibility for this space. I wonder if that would be a possibility.
Well, they have actually, there is a group, and there's, more than one abandoned graveyards or that aren't kept up, and unfortunately they're all Black.
Of course they are.
Yes. So
which brings in this idea of racism after death.
Exactly.
Right? That even in our death we have more privilege as white people.
Absolutely.
Than we would if we were Black.
Yes. And one of the things is like when the state says, nope, our hands are clean, not our responsibility, there's no laws.
Yeah.
No, there's no laws. Then you're relying on volunteers.
Right.
But volunteers, you're going to have to be able to choose what's going to be accomplished.
Right.
And with something like
exposure.
Eastport, you could not do that work with volunteers.
No, because it's too dangerous. It's too far gone.
It's going to require a massive amount of money.
Right.
And there's no way around that. You can't just go in and pull weeds. Like, you can't get in because you're going to fall in a hole.
Right. With a grave.
Yes.
Like with a freaking body.
Right. And what's so awful is that there are so many unmarked graves. Right. And there's there's babies and families that are in one plot, like this one spot.
Yeah.
And some of the people I found was the couple who began the very first Black school for deaf children.
Wow.
And one of the very first Black police officers in Knoxville.
Oh my goodness.
There is a lady who was traded up from Alabama, and she wasn't till much later in life when she was freed.
Oh, she was a slave.
Yes, she was a slave.
Oh,
so,
wow.
And there's a lot of people that are there that we don't even know their history.
Right. Because either their unmarked graves or the tombstones have been lost or destroyed or sunken into the ground.
Right. And when you think about another part of racism is record keeping.
Oh, yeah. It's the institutional systemic racism that
Yes.
really comes into play there, because we don't have the same kinds of records, which is why, as you've done your research, you found that this has been so hard to find any information on, because there's almost no record of this cemetery and of the people buried there, except for a few news articles and things.
Well, in Knox County, most of the people who works for the city had no idea existed until they came across a deed.
Right.
And even then, that was the first time. But I really think that the majority of the issue here is that it's such a big project. It's a huge project.
Yeah.
I don't think the government wants to get involved. I also think that the government doesn't want to admit the fault in what has happened to these historical places.
How far they've let it go.
Yes. And so one of the things about the cemetery and the lack of accountability includes a bill that was not supported by Tennessee's Marsha Blackburn.
Ugh. If I could just say cuss words on this,
Right.
this
So
podcast.
I right. Well, let's just keep it going.
We'll keep it professional
We'll try
today,
and stay on
guys.
topic.
But if there's anybody who wants me to, who pushes me to not be professional, it's Marsha Blackburn. So tell me about this. So what exactly is this law that's being proposed?
Well, I got
bill?
to actually speak with the they're a former president of the Society for Historical Archaeology, and during their tenure, they established the African American Burial Grounds Network Bill. What this does, it helps get that guidance and support to the Black cemeteries that's going to assist in identification and restoration.
Oh, wow.
He says without its passage, there is no mechanism to provide such assistance.
Right. So this is like the perfect solution.
Yes. So call Marsha Blackburn and request that the bill, the African American Burial Grounds Network Bill, is accepted and signed for, because it is our duty to recognize and support Black people, past, present, and future.
Yeah.
Black lives matter. Black lives have always mattered.
Yeah. And they should matter more right now than they have.
It is 2020, y'all.
Yeah, like we should really, I mean, we should have stepped up a long time ago. And that's how these things, these sorts of situations, like this cemetery being allowed to be in such disarray, just shows you that systemic racism that permeates our culture and our society, and are in places that we hope that it doesn't exist, like our government. They own it. And they've also done other things, right? Like you're pretty sure that they've built roads over over bodies,
if you
right?
were to look at the land previously and the outline from where the cemetery was in that stretch, because that area bumps up to another graveyard.
Is it another African American graveyard?
Yes. And it's pretty inaccessible.
Is it also overgrown?
Oh, yes. All of them are. But
yeah.
Like all of them that I've found is not being maintained the way it should be. Now, there is a group that's worked with some of the cemeteries, and they've done a great job, and they have done what they can, but it is constant need.
It's constant work.
Right. And
it needs to be underneath like the maintenance, like crew for the city or something that is taking care of
and
these
there's
things.
no law.
Right.
You,
So there's no reason for them to spend the money.
Exactly. No, absolutely not. Now, they'll pay for them to come and get these massive dump trucks and haul off probably, an acre worth of garbage. No problem.
Yeah.
But they're not going to even look over there because there might be a graveyard.
Right, yeah.
But one of the biggest things I found, and if anyone has any more information as far as law and cemetery, like I'd love if you reached out. But there's actually a clause in there that says the government does not have responsibility unless it has to do with safety.
Which this seems like a safety issue.
Huge.
Yeah.
It is the state that it just keeps getting worse.
Right. That's the problem, is that unless you do something to deter it now, it's just going to get worse. And you're going to have exposed bodies. Like
oh yes. And it's scary. Like,
yeah.
and when you're walking on certain parts, you're very concerned because
right.
of how jagged the slippage and from the sinkholes are.
And I have to ask, this might put you in a precarious situation, but was it easily accessible? Like, was there like a gate that you went through? Was there any signage that said you shouldn't go in?
No.
Like,
no, there's a little chain link fence that is, also like buried right on top of foot markers. Like, so between the foot marker and the headstone, there's a fence on it.
Oh my God, over bodies?
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah.
Just no respect.
No.
Like, that's crazy to me.
And then across the street, you can't get in there at all. But there is also graves and just massive.
So it seems like the road was built over bodies because there's graves on both sides of the road.
Yes.
Which is just the height of disrespect. And it makes you wonder, like, do they do that to white cemeteries?
Oh, no.
Right?
We don't have a Daughters of Confederacy for black people.
Right, exactly.
That's not a thing.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Which comes around to how important people need to see this.
Right.
It has to have people getting involved. It is such a massive job. Like, the city has even once said, what do we do with it?
Wow.
Even if we could, what would we do?
Right.
Because there are several unmarked graves, which also can be led back to racism, because this is in a red line district. Therefore, the people that have been living there are automatically in a worse situation to try to get out.
Right. Can you explain red line districts?
Red line is basically the government comes in, draws a red line up around a community, tries to say it's some sort of opportunity zone or something else, but is basically saying, black neighborhood, take everything away, make it poor.
Right.
So if you
don't invest.
Right. Yes. And if you were to have family buried there, how would you be able to maintain it?
Right, because you can't as one person maintain an entire cemetery. You can't as even a small group of people. You can't, especially at this level of decay.
There would be no way a group of volunteers would be able to come in
and do anything.
And it's one of those things. There's houses backed up onto it that probably, I would believe, some of those houses own part of that cemetery. Which I don't feel like that would be necessarily the property owner's responsibility to tend to that cemetery that was there before that house was built.
Right.
I think the government needs to have some sort of responsibility,
right?
Just to get to this situation,
right? And it seems like with this bill, there's like a certain amount of oversight that would be happening, and then they would be able to find the funds or find the person who would be willing to be over this cemetery and say, okay, yeah, we're going to make sure that these things are taken care of, as well as the other black cemeteries in Knoxville. So please call your senator.
Right. Well, and then also Joe Joseph, he had said abandoned cemeteries need physical labor support for cleanup and maintenance, as well as professional support for recording and repairs.
Oh, wow.
So unless we have the right people involved, we are not going to get anywhere.
Right.
Something else which is great, and I'm in the current process of, is Joe had put me in contact with a guy named Robbie Jones, and Robbie Jones had forwarded, just some really great information as far as what we need to do first. And really what we recognize is that the Eastport, African American Cemetery, Good Citizen Cemetery, it is not recorded on a Tennessee sort of registration, but as a cemetery,
Really?
but it's known by some of the preservation community.
Oh, I see. So it's found its way into some of these groups that are historically preserving things, but
Yes.
It doesn't actually have an official record, which again brings in the racism thing, because it's like, why would they be overlooked compared to other cemeteries that have been? And it would be interesting to see what the numbers are on like white cemeteries versus black cemeteries being seen and recorded professionally.
Well, and what's also unfortunate is that we have maps dating back from, early 1930s.
Yeah.
And nothing's changed
Yeah.
other than houses are being built
Right.
and just keeps getting pushed further back till nobody knows. And that's where we are.
Right. And we looked at some of the deeds and things that I think the Society of Historical Archaeology sent you, and there was a map, and they said, I don't see any way that there could be 5,000 to 6,000 graves in this graveyard, and it seems like, okay, if that's the case, then maybe some of these houses have been built on top of graves.
Definitely.
Which is so disrespectful and also spooky. Who wants to live on top of people's bodies? But
Right.
also, it's just like, at that rate, it's like, does that happen in white areas?
Well, you see, so 1946, 1955, 1969, it shows parcels of land belonging to private lots, private ownership.
Right.
Those people are probably not
With us anymore?
I mean, it's a good chance if you're like a 1925 girl, like you're
right. You're
I
probably
mean,
gone by now.
1946 as an adult, like that's a minute ago.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
not possible, but I doubt that they live there.
Right.
I don't know. I haven't met them because it's. How do you know? Hi, excuse me. Do you know have a cemetery in your backyard?
Right. Exactly.
Like, I
Would
don't know
you
if
like
do
to
this.
fix it?
Hi.
Okay.
Probably not a great idea. I don't like when people knock on my door.
Right. Yeah. It's the millennials and us. We're like, who's knocking at the door?
Yes.
Don't answer it.
So when you look at the maps, you can see that the cemetery expands across the entire curve of the road. And there was properties later developed, and a lot of them are either vacant, overgrown, or empty completely. And those are the ones that Knox County owns that are, your little local dump there.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's
the graveyard.
It's
where we dump our garbage.
Yeah. It's like.
Also, why? Just take it to the dump. Like, why dump your garbage in the middle of nowhere in a graveyard?
Well, it's like, they don't know it's a graveyard.
Yeah,
they
because
don't
there's no
know.
signage or
well,
anything.
you can't even see inside
Well,
of
and
it.
that was like what I was kind of getting to earlier is like, if the government has a responsibility, if there is a safety issue, but they've put no signage up that says this is a dangerous area, do not enter or whatever, then they're responsible for that. And that's not a solution. Like, that's not what I want. I don't want them to put signs up saying don't enter and then just close it off and let it keep being overgrown. But it seems like there's responsibility there that they should be doing something because
Right.
it is a safety issue.
And what I'm very glad that there are resources out there that is going to with this Society of Historical Archaeology. There is an entire resource guide of how to abandon. Don't abandon anything.
Right.
How to tend to abandoned burial grounds. And why this bill is so important that I was discussing earlier, that we really need to get Marsha on board, is because it allows people to come in and deem it as a historical place.
Right.
But that gives us the ability to survey the land and use certain equipment to actually gauge where people are buried and how to restore these headstones, or how do we, or even identification, finding records that I don't have access to.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anybody has access to.
And it's a big job, but identifying, it's hard, especially if you have no idea how to. You know, it's not just like your common problem. Like, hi, I have this abandoned graveyard in my yard. I was wondering if you could come take a look at it. That's not
it's definitely a very specific skill set, is to know how to do that and how to dig through those records and how to find those things. But also with that comes, well, how do you identify graves when they're either unmarked or the tombstones have disappeared? Like, there's just a certain amount of work that professionals would have to do, people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to historical cemeteries and preserving them and restoring them.
Well, and the government, they have even said kind of out there, it would be great if someone came forward and took responsibility and bought the 2 parcels from the county.
So we don't have to deal with it.
Yes, that was an article.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And where is that article from?
WBIR,
okay.
Which is a local news station here in Knoxville.
Right.
But again, the county's only concern and duty is to ensure there's no threat to the safety of public. So, I mean, that could be argued by someone who doesn't care, as in, well, no one goes in there. I'm like, well, yeah, because you can't.
Because you can't.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous, right?
And
exactly.
You're denying people peace.
Yeah.
Or even just dignity.
Dignity. I mean, that's a big one.
It's just, and you think about the families that are the families that are buried there, the families that have mourned, and could you imagine maybe, your grandmother was one of the last buried there in the 50s, and you were a little kid, and you go now, and you can't even.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
You can't even
walk in. The 50s were not that long ago. So that means that they stopped burying people there and essentially just left it to the dogs and said, like, whatever, nature will do its thing.
Right. And people, if they're not familiar with kudzu, they just don't understand how uncontrollable it is.
Yeah, and how fast it grows.
And it eats everything.
Right.
And so because of that happening, I think the government has just allowed a wall to grow around it in order to hide it.
Yeah.
In order to not have to look at the skeletons in the closet.
Yeah. The literal skeletons in the closet.
Just
right.
Cover it up.
Yep.
And
because in the 50s, a black cemetery would not have been important. And like now, I mean, we would like to think that there would be more exposure, or like if they had a cemetery that people stopped burying people in 2020, that maybe in 70 years it would still be in at least passable condition, because we live in a slightly different time than the 50s were for civil rights and things like that. But I think that there's like a lot of shame involved there, right? Like, I think exactly what you're saying, that they allowed a literal wall to grow up around this cemetery because they realized that, like, okay, because they bought this land in 2007, right? Knox County did.
And the thing is, it's like the majority of everybody they don't know existed, and that includes the people that own it.
Right.
Like including the county, like the people who work there, and you think about the workers that work there, and there's something about saying, I'm sorry, or we messed up, and the accountability, people. And so it's easier. Well, it's easier to say, well, I can't apologize for something I didn't know about.
Right. It's a lot easier to say you don't know anything about it.
And then and
it.
whatever. Yeah. Because then there's no hold to anything.
Right.
And I really think that this cemetery, along others, because black cemeteries and abandonment is a huge, huge, huge thing. And there was lobbyists out there trying to get bills passed in the House, like in the Senate, like to get, I forget the exact amount, but it was over $1 billion to help restore African-American cemeteries.
Well, and it shows you just the fact that this bill has even been put into, out into the world, that it obviously is a problem.
Yes.
And it's just one more way that we've managed to be racist.
And keep racism alive,
yes.
even for the dead.
Even for the dead. I mean, it's really wild how it just exposes so much of those like institutional problems that have been, even though we may have progressed in social ways and in personal ways, it hasn't progressed institutionally, that those institutions are like a ship that you have to try to steer out of the way very quickly, and it doesn't happen. They don't move on a dime. They move very slowly, and we can see that racism is being perpetuated by the slowness of those institutions to progress.
I think that the entire community over there is in such a condition that isn't kept up anyway. The city only cares about violence or whatever else that has been put in a struggle into people's lives, but they don't, I think sometimes when they think, well, what would we do with it? Going back to when the county recognized it, they don't know what they would do with it. And I think looking at the part of town that it's in, I don't think they would want to.
No, they're not interested in it.
No.
Because it can't make them money and it can't progress whatever it is that they are aiming for. Well, on that note, I think that we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about what you think should be done about it.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Purple Mountain Pods presents your newest podcast obsession, Fem History, hosted by me, Alex Sharp. This feminist history podcast highlights women who have been ignored or altogether erased from our collective history. Women like Audre Lorde, Black, lesbian, womanist warrior poet who changed the face of activism, feminist theory, and the landscape of 20th century poetry in America. Listen as I tell the stories of these women to a special guest each week, and perhaps learn a little something about the women who helped build our world, whether we learned about them in history class or not. Check out Fem History, coming in January 2021. Listen wherever you find your podcasts. Welcome back, everybody. This is Alex, and I'm here talking with Schylar Knox about racism after death and what that looks like. During the break, we were kind of discussing what we've already talked about, and we've heard of this like very real example, right, of what racism after death could be. And I think that one of the themes that comes up a lot, and something that's really important to me as a librarian, is access to information, right? So right before the break, we were talking about how, or it might have been about halfway through, we were talking about how record keeping is another form of institutional racism that we don't really address very much. And something that we were talking about during the break was this particular tidbit that you found.
Yes. A lot of abandoned cemeteries eventually had property or houses built around it. But when the owner of the land was ready to move, they would remove the surveying markers of the cemetery off of their property to make more money.
Oh, so like removing gravestones.
They're like surveying markers. I'm not sure if I am positive people have probably moved those off.
I'm sure they have. It would be so tempting to remove that if there's no record of there being a body there.
And then if they can move their line in, and then it goes also back to like, who does it belong to? So they've sold this property, and it's still masking the cemetery.
Right.
It still keeps it unavailable to see or understand, because these registrations and these deeds, a lot of them are lacking that, and that formality of the situation. It's being hidden kind of in that very right there in your face, but it's a puzzle. You have to just pull all these pieces together from time periods, and it's just so big.
Yeah, it's such a big project. To try to restore and record these cemeteries must be nearly impossible. And then you add the hurdle of it being completely overgrown and inaccessible in every way.
Right.
It makes it really hard to keep those records.
And it starts almost an argument.
Yeah.
Who's going to take care of it?
It's a controversy.
Well, the government, they are going to say they aren't, it's not their responsibility. These homeowners that do live there are going to be like, it's definitely not our responsibility. And how could it be? Like, it's just.
And is it their responsibility? I mean, really, there's a question there.
And it's just a giant question mark.
Yeah.
You don't know who's there. You didn't know it was there. You don't know who does what with who. And then it has the giant question mark of people, even the government, not knowing.
Right. And with this huge question mark, we know what the problem is, right? We've talked and discussed about what all the issues are surrounding, especially in this specific example, the Good Citizen Cemetery, but also for African-American cemeteries all over the country. So what are the solutions? What are things that we can do both at the local Good Citizen Cemetery level, and what can we do even bigger? Like, we know that this bill is up that could be passed if Marsha Blackburn would agree to it. And you can tell she really riles me up.
She ruffles my feathers.
Yeah, she ruffles my feathers, that's for sure. So talking about, like, other than this bill that could absolutely make such a difference when it comes to places like Good Citizen Cemetery, what can we do otherwise?
At Eastport Cemetery's level, there is not very much you can do as a individual person, other than maybe tending to the weeds on the very front line.
Right.
There's a gentleman who, this was from an article a few years ago, and I haven't been able to personally track him down, so I don't want to just drop his name.
Sure.
But he had family that was buried there, and his aunt, until her 80s, would take care of this one little corner plot.
Right.
And he is older now, and that plot, who's gonna take care of it?
Sure.
And it's like, here's our one chance to go ahead and, like,
save one piece of it.
Yes, like, let's do something, like, and then expand.
Yeah.
This is going to need massive support. And very fortunately, I've been speaking with the SHA. They are going to assist in getting the cemetery recording. So he can do that, and it makes it an official archaeological site.
Awesome.
Yes. So that's beginning. And that kind of gives us a little bit more wiggle room to learn more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some impetus, like
Yes.
somebody is pushing something
Yes.
forward
Yes.
with this. Okay,
So
awesome.
this is just the beginning.
Sure.
I have learned so much, and it is just overwhelming. And
Yeah.
I've wanted to just scream out it,
Yeah.
just tell everybody. But then it's also a thing death is so personal.
Yes.
And people aren't really comfortable with it, which is like,
No,
I mean,
not in our culture.
No, right. And that is also because it's a community.
Yeah.
You're going to you have to work together. But having the baby steps and getting into it and having people look at it then gives us an opportunity to find out really what needs to be done. Because sure, you could maybe put up another plaque.
Well,
but
with historical preservation societies and things like that make sites, memorialized historical sites, the way that they would for the church that's on the grounds of the cemetery, that has some protections that come with it.
Right.
So it seems like trying to get it on track for like a historical preservation site, it seems like that would be such a step in the right direction to maybe starting to get it repaired and maintained, or at least recognized.
That's it. Awareness. This is just so much of the beginning.
Right.
Because when we first talked and I told you a little bit about it, and you saw the videos I had sent you,
Baffling.
it's insane.
Yeah.
I've just, it's, you're angry, you're confused.
Because
it's
we
a very
expect dignity in death. Like, that is something that's important. Or at least we find important in our culture, is like, there is supposed to be a certain dignity that is kept alive after we go, even if our families are not around to keep our graves like clean and safe, that somebody is there. Like, we hope and expect that. So then when you put that extra layer of white privilege versus being black or brown or whatever, it's like, oh my God, this seems so crazy. And it kind of reminds me of, have you watched Pose? No. Okay, so it's about the transgender community in New York, and it talks a lot about the AIDS epidemic and how they would bury AIDS patients on this like island outside of New York City in like pine boxes. And there was like this grave site set up that had little heart-shaped stones that had like all the gay people's names who had died, and it was a place of reverence. So it seems like that might be an option, putting up some sort of memorial or something. If there was research done to find as many names as you could find of people buried in this cemetery and then put up a memorial, does that seem like something that might be like an option?
One of the big problems is, how are you going to build a memorial there?
Right.
Because of the overgrowth, because of these massive sinkholes.
Yeah, such a good point.
Massive sinkholes. The slipping, there's an old well that has just slipped down. It was very concerning.
And I just don't even know what you would do about that. Like, how do you stabilize land? I don't know anything about that.
And that will be such an important part of being involved with a group, and this being in the hands of someone who really has those resources and getting the people there and
the equipment you would need.
Because unless you can look at the land, you have no idea what you're going against.
Right.
You can't just send it in and say, okay, flatten it, and we'll put up a statue, know. If we need someone to tell us and be like, the only way we can salvage this property is to create or build a memorial.
Sure.
And honoring the people who are here and finding their story.
And restoring as many graves as you can, like allowing for at least some of them.
It's all of us, most of us, I can't say all of us, we in death, we would wish it to be peaceful.
Sure.
And burial is often such a huge, important part of closure.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine having to go through that.
Right.
The coping that you have made or progressed or accepted, and then knowing that it is just another thing that disrespected these people.
Sure. Another tick on the list.
Right. And I had never thought about racism after death.
No, me neither. When you like approached me with that idea, I had to ask Cody to like clarify. I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, well, there's this cemetery. And I was like, oh my God, never even thought about it. Never considered it.
And the privilege part of it, because the SHA, they have so many great resources on their website.
I've seen you use several.
Oh,
so it
man,
looks like it's really
incredible.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great. But with them, we learn a little bit more about the history and particularly abandoned African American communities. As far as with the laws, we know that it's the family's responsibility or the property owner's responsibility, but then you also have a black community or brown community or that they don't even own the land there.
Right.
So
I was wondering about that because it seems like if the county owns it, or who owned it before? Was it white neighborhoods or was it white landowners? Even if it was black tenants, was it white landowners?
Right.
We don't even know.
And that's a problem with the dating. And this is why it's so important to get the awareness, to get the people that we need to look at this.
Who owns, if you buy land that has a body buried in it, do you own that body?
Well, that was one of the situations. It's because landowners then moved the surveying markers, which didn't look like it included the cemetery to make their property value higher, when really it did. So then that's kind of a confusing point there.
Yeah.
Is that gap, that bridge, like, and because of the community, it's a still underprivileged community. Like,
Right.
it is still lacking just the needs it needs.
Right.
That, you
Right.
know,
I
right?
totally
Like,
understand.
and I think that first, if Knoxville just came in and be a leader,
Yeah. This is an opportunity for them.
this is an opportunity for our country to change.
Yeah.
You know,
And
it's
not even our country, like our local regional area.
well, and that's what I was saying. Like, it's baby steps.
But those are huge steps.
Right.
Like when we see those kinds of decisions made by our local governments, it fortifies us, because sometimes our national politics can be so chaotic and so crazy, and we don't see things happening on a local level. We see things happening on a federal level.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's really nice to see our local government, the place where we
Right.
live, the
Mhm.
space we choose to occupy, making the decisions to protect like our fellow Black Americans and their dignity after they've died, like making those decisions that give us faith in them. I think that is such a huge step. And so you are so right. This is such an opportunity for them
Yes.
to pair with somebody like the SHA who knows what they're doing.
Right. Or it's the resources it's the resources. And
Yeah,
the
it's always
biggest
the
thing
resources.
is we got to get the awareness out so we
Yeah.
can, and then we can look more deeper into it and find these missing links that are the true root of racism after death.
Yeah.
You
If
gotta-
you're
you have to find the root.
if you're listening to this and you know that one of your family members has perhaps been buried in the Good Citizen Cemetery or the Eastport Cemetery, reach out to us. You can reach out to us at sparkinthevalley@gmail.com. And you can let us know if you know anything about this cemetery. It seems like any information you could get would be like valued,
Right.
because there's so little about it.
Right. And
So if you know of that, like,
it's just
let
broken
us know.
apart into all these different things. Like, sure,
Right.
it's like you can find the deed but then you can't find who owns it.
Right. Or do you know if the lines that are drawn are actual lines, or are there houses built on top of bodies? Like, that's a valid question to have. And, and even if it's just protecting this small amount of the cemetery, it seems like that is such a noble goal. Like,
Right.
Somebody needs to do something about it, because it's not just this one. This is the one you
Yes.
chose. This is the one that you happened upon that made all of this and inspired all of this. But there's also others. And there's probably
been
some in
awesome.
other people's communities, not just our own. I'm sure that that's the case.
Right.
And-
And that was so important for me, because this wasn't my accident I stumbled across. This was me being like, oh my God, this is happening. I have to use my resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I have the resources, or at least I can find the resources
Right.
in order to spark
And your
something.
privilege. Your
Yes,
privilege helps so much too,
absolutely.
because it just
It's
pushes you along. You have
right.
to use that privilege.
Listen, white people, we have privilege.
Yes, we
Like,
do.
and we have a responsibility.
Yes, with that privilege comes responsibility.
Yes.
If you want an
You
equitable,
can't say I'm not privileged. Yes, you
Right.
are. It is, and that is a part of it.
it's part of
Use
our
it
societal
to make
code.
it better.
Yeah, exactly. We can use it if we choose to, which is
Yes.
exactly what you're choosing to do.
Yes.
And I think that that's so important. And I'm so glad that someone like the Society of Historical Archaeology
Man,
even
that was
exists.
awesome.
How
Man,
awesome is that?
They were telling me and forwarding me and just totally
including you in this conversation.
just on board and telling me, this is what we need to do. This is where you can learn more about this. If you want me to get you in touch with whoever, it's a lot. And I have really big hopes.
Yeah,
But it starts with us, starts with Knoxville.
right.
And it starts with us calling our local representatives and Marsha Blackburn.
Yep.
We need to tell them that we want the African American Burial Grounds Network bill to be passed. This is going to help protect and give guidance and be able to go in and find their identification and give it restoration.
Yeah, this provides the resources that we're talking about that we need. So it's vitally important that
Yes.
you, and go to your city council.
Yes.
Speak up. Okay, so Cody asked, how can we get in touch with Marsha Blackburn? So we're actually going to give you the phone number for her Knoxville office.
That's 865-540-3781.
We could also call the representative for in the House of Representatives is Tim Burchett for this area that Eastport is in Knoxville. And we're going to give you his phone number as well.
And that's 202-224-3121.
So give them a call, or you can go to Marsha Blackburn's site and email her. There's an email option from her website. So you can just Google her and you should be able to contact her that way if you're more comfortable doing that. I can tell you, as a person who's called her representatives quite a lot, I was really, really pissed in 2016. So I called a lot of representatives.
Yes.
And so if it really is not hard. You talk to like a receptionist. You just say, hey, I'm calling to say that I want Marsha Blackburn to vote yes on passing this particular bill. They will write it down. They will make sure she sees it.
It's and what that means is like passing it is agreeing to co-sponsor the bill. So it kind of gives that recognition of that assistance. So asking that they pass or request that they become co-sponsors, that's all you really need to say.
Even better. Awesome. Yes. So you can just let them know at their office, and that's one of the best ways that we can help hopefully get this bill passed, because it's the easiest and best way to get this done.
We have to.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of the, we would have to have it. And again, Joe Joseph said without his passage, there's no mechanism to provide such assistance.
Right.
So we have to pass it. We can do better, guys.
Yeah.
It's 2020.
Yeah, I agree.
And I am fortunate and I'm lucky and I am proud to be able to deliver this information.
Yes, and I'm so glad you have. Thank you so much for joining me today and bringing this really important story to the forefront.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward. I know that this is going to get the attention and traction it needs, and we can put all these missing links together and put
these people to a peaceful rest.
And come on, just recognize, come on, we can do better.
Yeah, we can recognize our responsibility.
We can face the skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, and in the graveyard.
Yep.
So thank you guys so much for joining us. If you have any information about the cemetery, or you just want to tell us what you think about this or how you think you might be able to help or volunteer, please email sparkinthevalleypodcast@gmail.com.
And I really appreciate you all having me today and allowing me to use my voice. I would also like to thank my great sociology teacher. She has been super supportive from day one. I want to thank, of course, my best friend Tiffany, who has the heart to go and bring this to surface.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank the connections I made really reaching out with SHA and Joe and Robbie.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you so much. If you guys want to learn more about how SHA works, it's sha.org.
Cool.
You can find tons of awesome resources. And I hope that you all share this story with other people and
spread it.
Yes, inspire. Come on.
Yeah.
We can do something really big and something that it's so well deserved.
Yeah, I agree.
Again, there has been some great work on these surrounding African American cemeteries, and volunteers have put their heart and soul into it. But with Eastport Cemetery, it is completely different.
Yeah, and it can be brought there.
Yes, but we need the help.
Yeah.
That nothing is just it's way larger than just a volunteer's hands.
Yeah. So with all of your help, spread this message, and hopefully we'll get it out there and
call our representatives.
We'll see some change, and call your representatives.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today, guys. We hope to hear from you soon.
Bye.
This special episode on racism after death has been produced by Purple Mountain Pods. Hosted by Schylar Knox and Alex Sharp, produced by Cody Hensley, and original music by Cody Hensley. Special thanks to Schylar Knox for doing so much wonderful research. Also to the Society of Historical Archaeology for all the resources they provided for this podcast.